My name's Paul Edmondson and I'm Head of Research for the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust in Stratford-upon-Avon, and I'm here again at the Craiova Shakespeare Festival, which I first came to in 2006, and it's great to come back to this wonderful happening which for 30 years has been going strong, which means I guess it's the 15th edition of the festival. I've met many times the founder visionary Emil Borragina, who is obviously a great human being and is great at bringing out greatness in other people. I've seen many international productions here over that time. I remember, as many people do, 2010, when I didn't see all the productions of Hamlet, but I saw 5 of them. I remember in a Polish production, I think it was a Polish production of Hamlet, Laertes murdering Ophelia in the bath. And I remember a Chinese production of Hamlet, which was partially filmed, and part of the actors were being partially filmed and projected onto a big screen during the performance. And this was something like I'd never seen before. I've seen concerts here. I remember especially a wonderful evening of Berlioz's Shakespearean music. I remember seeing Verdi's Falstaff here, and the sheer variety of productions is just breathtaking. This evening I'm seeing a flamenco production of Hamlet. Well, I can start easily to imagine what a flamenco Hamlet might be like. What a great thing to do to Hamlet. So I'm looking forward to seeing the result of that later today.
Tell me about your relationship with some other people from Craiova or Romania, or tell me about the quality of this festival.
Well, it's my pleasure to know Emil Borragina and to know people connected with the University of Craiova, and also a Romanian friend of mine who's been based in the United Kingdom for many years, Professor Nicoleta Cin-Poeș. And she was given an honorary doctorate yesterday by the university here, and we're all very proud of her because she's led since 2008 the European Shakespeare Research Association conferences here, which run alongside the festival. I've enjoyed meeting theatre critics and taken part significantly in their discussions. They had their own symposium every year as part of the festival. So it's been a good range of conversations and performances and cultural experiences. Exhibitions is another thing which I can recall, and the internationality of the festival is very important to it and very important to its audiences. Companies from South Africa, from the UK of course. Declan Donnellan and Nick Ormerod received honorary doctorates at the University of Craiova this last weekend. For many years they've been leading a great company called Cheek by Jowl, which I first saw perform in my home city of York when I was 16 years old, and I saw what then was highly original. It remains original, but it's become very famous, an all-male production of As You Like It with Adrian Lester as Rosalind, and I certainly enjoyed it when I was 16. I'd never seen anything like it before, but of course I didn't then know it was going to become quite so famous as it has become, and I'm very pleased I saw it when I was at school. My English teacher in those days, we weren't studying the play, but she told us one morning, she said, "I bought you all tickets and you've all got to come to see it," and we all went.
Which other festivals are you going to visit?
I have a good connection with the International Shakespeare Verona Fringe Festival and the International Verona Shakespeare Summer School. Those sit alongside the main Verona Shakespeare Festival, which is quite different, but of course they all take place in fair Verona, as Shakespeare calls it, at the beginning of Romeo and Juliet. And I've been going there for 2 years. I'm hoping to go back in August. They bring together at least 100 students from different countries, and 50 of them are theatre practitioners, theatre orientated, theatre interested, and 50 of them are more academically inclined. And I speak to the latter part, but we connect up around the fringe performances which take place every evening during the summer school, and again that's very international in scope. 2 years ago I and many others were delighted and touched and moved to see a Ukrainian Midsummer Night's Dream as part of the Verona Festival. It was choreographed, it was mainly dance led, with some words, and it lasted about 50 minutes. And they'd flown in especially from Ukraine via Poland to come to Verona. And this was in the first year of the war. And it seems to me that these sorts of occasions, especially during war, are very important focal points for a sense of shared hope and shared fortitude and shared love among cultures and audiences and those who produce the art.
But of course, it's so much culture and beauty in the world, and it's still a war now. How can we explain, we humans with some intellectual capacities, this kind of living, which are spreading now for many years and influence our life also?
Well, we people who make war, I suppose, genuinely believe that they know what's best for other people and literally want to take over other countries, and that seems to be the cause of all wars since forever, doesn't it? One country invades another. Of course they're wrong, and unfortunately it takes war often a very long time for human beings to be reminded that this is the wrong thing to do. And as we look at this with increased apprehension and despair and upset, we have to try and do whatever we can. I do believe in the United Nations. I do believe that people across the world seek peace, and I have to trust that. And I think, on a granular level, we need to keep on doing what we think makes for peace in our own lives and peace within ourselves. Shakespeare is a large subject, both historically and culturally, and you can start the conversation about Shakespeare in many different ways. Of course, I live and work in Stratford-upon-Avon, so I can easily start a conversation about the Stratford-upon-Avon Shakespeare, and I'm always pleased and proud to do that. A lot is known about the Stratford-upon-Avon of Shakespeare's time. A lot is known about the Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon. I work for the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, and we look after the 5 Shakespeare houses, one of which is the site of New Place, which is the large house that Shakespeare purchased in 1597 for his family. I recently was very much involved with an archaeological exploration of the site of New Place, and we learned a lot more about it and had a lot confirmed that we already knew about it, but illustrating that confirmation in a way that had not been possible before the archaeology. It was a large house. Shakespeare paid something like £120 for it in 1597, when he was good at gaining that level of credit, I suppose, in order to buy the house. He'd already co-founded the Lord Chamberlain's Men in 1594, and one of the things that the archaeological exploration of the house enabled us to do was to, as it were, revisit the traditional biography of Shakespeare and think again about his closeness to his hometown, because nobody would buy a house that size and pay so much for it and not want to spend any time there. And it was Stanley Wells, the great Shakespeare scholar and honorary president of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, who put into our minds Shakespeare as the first literary commuter, somebody who moved between the 2 great centres of his life, Stratford-upon-Avon and London. He never owned a freehold in London until 1613, when he bought the Blackfriars gatehouse, and then he didn't seem to spend any time there. He was an intermittent lodger in London. His roots were in his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. Stratford-upon-Avon was not a kind place to actors in during Shakespeare's career. Just before his career took off, the town had decided that there were going to be no visiting theatrical troupes come to Stratford unless they were heavily fined for performing. So it wasn't a great place artistically, so little wonder he wanted to spend as much time in London as possible. But his family and his home were in Stratford, and it's easy to imagine Shakespeare writing in New Place, walking into the countryside, thinking through his plays, even on horseback, which was about 3 or 4 day journey from London to Stratford. You're able to think while you're journeying. That's what poets do. Poets have speeches and lines that they want to polish and improve as they're waiting in queues for things or travelling. This is how writers operate. So Shakespeare, in the commuting model of his career, certainly had plenty of time to think through his work while he was travelling. And I think towards the end of his life, of course, we don't know that Shakespeare knew he was going to die until he did. And so it's too easy to say, oh, he retired back to Stratford, or towards the end of his life. Well, how did he know that? He was only in his early 50s when he died. Let's acknowledge that he spent less time in London and more time in Stratford from 1613 onwards. And maybe that was because he wanted to put together what became the folio volume of his plays. I think probably he was working on this project himself while he was in New Place, away from London. He was still collaborating with John Fletcher, the younger playwright, during that period. And then, of course, I think Shakespeare died prematurely in 1616, probably, as we're told in the record, of a fever that he caught whilst out drinking with Ben Jonson and Michael Drayton, who visited him in Stratford-upon-Avon in, I guess, March 1616. There is no moral obligation to like Shakespeare. I think back to how I started, and my story is very similar to many other people's stories. I had a wonderful school teacher, and I think, like many of the great works of art, you need somebody to show you. It's no good just saying, oh, go to Mozart, go to Shakespeare, go to Rembrandt. Well, you can, and it might not be very easy to know where to start. So I think you need somebody to inspire you with the taste for Shakespeare. And for me, that was a school teacher when I was 14, which sounds quite late. I'd heard of Shakespeare. I think I read my first line of Shakespeare only the year before. We'd looked at one tiny moment in English class from Romeo and Juliet. And then the next year we were studying the whole of Macbeth. But it was the teacher who was teaching us Macbeth that really ignited Shakespeare in my imagination for me. We thought about the imagery in the play. I remember her describing very vividly when Macbeth talks about the blood on his hands after he's murdered King Duncan. These hangman's hands, he says, these hangman's hands. And she talked a lot about what that image meant and why a hangman, an executioner in Shakespeare's time, would have had bloody hands. And there was something very visceral and very alive and very real about her description that really connected with me, and Shakespeare's brilliance of turning that into poetry. And also to realize that it's not necessarily the case that people in Shakespeare's time understood Shakespeare better than we did. The poetry was probably difficult for them as well. So we fall into a trap if we try to only make Shakespeare easy. Shakespeare requires that we think, Shakespeare requires that we feel, and Shakespeare requires that we both hear him and understand him, and also that we see him bodied forth in the theatre. And that's a very great invitation. And if you can connect somebody, however old they are, to one of those four things, then I think that might be a good way into Shakespeare. And of course there's the pleasure of the story. Film adaptations can sometimes help, but they have to be good. And again, it's all right to say, well, we'll go and see the play in the theatre. Is it a good production? You can put someone off for life by taking them to see a not very easy to understand production of a Shakespeare play, or one that is too boring or slow paced. So one's got to select with care in introducing people to Shakespeare, which is why it does need somebody who knows about Shakespeare to inspire a taste in other people, I'd say.
What it's about the balcony? about the Verona's Romeo and Juliet balcony.
In Verona, there is the Casa di Giulietta, which is a genuine, civic, wonderful building from before Shakespeare's time. It's a late medieval building, I believe, and it's in the centre of the old part of Verona. And I think since the 1930s, or maybe a bit before, it was identified or named as Juliet's house. And the balcony, which many thousands of people go and see every day, is not original to the house. It was a sarcophagus which was fixed to the side of the house to make it look like a balcony. So this is a great illustration of how you can decide to tell a story about Shakespeare and connect history with fiction, so you end up with something like either historical fiction or faction or biofiction. And of course, what's most significant about the House of Juliet is that it's become a focal point for people to think about Shakespeare, and one of the greatest love stories ever told, which has now and for many, many years had a kind of mythical status, hasn't it? In fact, there's another oddity about the place, because there's a statue of Juliet in bronze from the 1970s, and she's not on the balcony, she's below the balcony. It should be Romeo on the ground and Juliet on the balcony. How that happened is anybody's guess, but I suppose it's about connecting with Juliet first and foremost. It's her house, and you can't do that if she's on the balcony without paying to go in. So you can go and see the statue of Juliet, and I think it's her left breast, which is very touched and shiny, because it's supposed to be good luck if you touch Juliet's left breast, close to her heart. And also for many years, which is a staggering, I think, psychological fact, there have been letters written to Juliet from mainly young women from around the world with problems. So the mythical Juliet has become a kind of agony aunt for the international girlhood and young womanhood, which really connects the power of the story and Shakespeare's play with the power of our imagination and the power of art to make real for us our inner selves. And I think that's a really good illustration of that reality, to know that people write letters to Juliet.
What do you write?
I don't write to her. I did once write to her. She never replied. I was with a group of visitors from Stratford-upon-Avon and elsewhere, and we were doing a tour of Verona and Venice, the Shakespearean tour. We went to Verona and we wrote a letter to Juliet and put it in the letterbox there, but she never replied. The most important part of my life is my Christian faith, and that is the root of all my happiness that I've ever known. And so I look to the world and I think about Christian values, and I see them writ large in the goodness of most human beings that I know. I see kindness, and I see love, and I see people helping each other, and hopefully being patient with each other and encouraging each other and persevering and giving each other hope. These are the sorts of things that make life possible. And of course, one can easily find those values in art, which I do. So art is the great fortifier of life after my Christian faith.